Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Debate program with your host Tariq Khan. Today we will explore and analyze hybrid warfare concepts, international relations. Let me introduce our guest in program, Mr. Bertil Huger. You are associate fellow at European Center of University of Southwestern Russia. Sir, thank you so much for joining, and you are most welcome in the program.
Thank you very much, Tariq, for having me in your program today.
Sir, what is the hybrid warfare concept all about? How would you explain this?
I think hybrid warfare is a very exciting concept because it takes us away from the normal, let's say, Western paradigm of war designed by, in a way, theoretically by Karl von Clausewitz, who designed, let's say, the total war concept, where both sides increase to the extremes. And the hybrid warfare concept is much more nuanced than that. So, and in this part, I think the work done by two Chinese strategists, namely Qiao Lang and Wang Jiancui, excuse my Chinese, both colonels of the Chinese Air Force, is very enlightening, because they just explain to us how very far away from this total war concept they present a toolbox of actually 24 types of conflicts for the 21st century. And actually what is very interesting here is that you can combine all these conflicts to be more effective to achieve your goals. I say to my students sometimes, like it's like a DJ mix tables where you choose the right amount of pressure to exert on your opponents. And it's also interesting because in this new world of hybrid warfare, conflict is not necessarily only conflict. It can be also go together with cooperation. So it's kind of a also more nuanced world. So of course, without going into the 24 types of conflicts, I would like just to mention that these two Chinese scholars see three big families of conflicts. They call the military conflicts, which is like, as usual in a way, from nuclear war to conventional war and terrorist warfare. They also, that's what is relatively new, they introduced the supramilitary level with technological warfare, warfare to control information network, and not referring here to TV, but more like to internet, more to the 5G, more to the clouds, and also the physical networks, the cables, and also the diplomatic warfare. And then the third family is what they call the non-military conflicts, which is very varied from financial conflict. So basically when you can influence, because we're in a globalized world, when you can influence the stock exchange in New York or in London or in Hong Kong, then you can, of course, weaken as well your opponent. You can have like tariffs, like sanction war, which is now used like against Russia, for example. Ideological and psychological warfare, which I think is pretty clear. Ideological, when you have, for example, illiberal regimes, democratic regimes, will do their best to reduce the credibility of the opponent's regime. And psychological warfare is to also try to demoralize your enemy from inside, and also increase the morale of your own people. So demoralizing would be also the ideal of the old Chinese strategy. Sun Tzu, who said the ideal of warfare is not to conquer fighting, but to conquer demoralizing your enemies, and then without having to fight at all. And last, maybe interesting is what they call lawfare, like law warfare, is how the different countries can wage some kind of a war through the multilateral organizations like the UN, like the WTO for commerce, like the World Health Organization, where you just gain influence, and with its influence in this organization, you also try to weaken the opponent. So threats, well, actually, it is related in the sense that then a threat can convert into a warfare. But sometimes the threat is sufficient in order to deter your opponent. So that's interesting that, for example, if a state has a very big, let's say, cyber capacities, offensive cyber capacity, maybe sometimes just knowing that they have these abilities to be very offensive and to do a lot of damage in your own country will refrain other competitors to attack. So threat can be sort of a preliminary to attack, but it can be as well sort of a deterrence strategy.
Sir, is military conflict between US and China in the coming year expected? How would you analyze this?
Yes, I think this topic is being discussed by a lot of scholars worldwide. It's a very important topic. It's a major topic because both the US and China are competing for world hegemony economically, but also at military level. And what we know in history is like almost each time that this situation happened, like one competitor, let's say China, is gaining hegemony over the hegemon, it leads to a war. It's what is called the Thucydides trap. And I don't think actually we will avoid falling into this trap because the tensions are getting more tense by the day between these two powers. None of these two powers will like to back down. So yes, I do think there will be a conflict. But where I maybe have a different view than other scholars is that many scholars think that the conflict will resolve basically this hegemony problem. But it won't. It won't for two reasons. One reason is because both the US and China are nuclear power, which obviously, unless you want everybody to die, you cannot use these nuclear bombs. So the fact that we have these horrific bombs actually, paradoxically, has an effect of restraint on war. And then the second argument is that whereas the US is a sea power, China is a continental power. So, you cannot do much. I mean, US won't invade China, doesn't have the possibility to invade China. So what will happen is one of the two will win in the China Sea, but it won't solve the hegemonic problem because if China's economy, carries on at a very high pace, higher than the rest of the world, then it will lead to hegemony. A bit later, maybe, but it would lead to it. So it's more geoeconomy than the geostrategy, which will give us the answer. Obviously, what I say is not that this war won't be terrible. Of course, for the neighboring countries, I think about Taiwan, I think about maybe some part of Japan, some islands, maybe Vietnam. These will have consequences locally. But I'm just saying, I'm arguing that geopolitically, it won't solve the issues. Like if you remember the first Gulf War against Saddam Hussein, it was a war to free Kuwait. So Kuwait was freed. And then what happened? Saddam Hussein was still in power, and the problem was not, into brackets, the problem was not solved. And then there was a second war. But this won't be possible this time, as I said, because the US won't have the possibility to invade China.
Sir, keeping in the mind the military conflict between US China, do you think that there is a new Cold War between the US and China? expected in the coming years? How would you explain this?
Well, I think we're already seeing the first signs of this new Cold War. If you remember, like the summit, the US-China summit in Alaska was pretty undiplomatic, was very tough, and maybe for Chinese standard at least insulting. And you can see also how the US is lobbying worldwide to prevent Huawei for 5G system to be adopted in countries, invoking some security issues. When you see also what we see in the press against, the Uyghur, who are a Muslim minority in China, are the object of genocide. I'm not saying that the situation for Uyghurs is good. I'm not putting any judgment in that, but I'm saying that if the relationship between China and the rest of the world, and more or less the US were good, then the US wouldn't talk about the Uyghurs. So the Uyghurs is not the cause of what is going is not a cause why things are going badly between China and the US. It's a consequence. It's because you see that in the press that you can tell that the situation between the diplomatic situation between the two is pretty bad. And the last argument is saying, actually the US is seeing that they are losing this struggle, this fight for hegemony with the current rules, the multipolar rules. And they say, well, we have to change the rules. We have to turn the tables. And the idea is to change the rules into ideological fight, sort of what you call a Cold War. So we have the democracies on the one hand, and we have the illiberal regimes on the second hand. And if you just dictate this new paradigm, these new rules, then all different countries will have to decide whether they stick to China or stick to the US. And it will have an impact, obviously, on Chinese economy, because a lot of Western countries will take the choice not to invest in technology in China, maybe to reduce the presence of the Chinese market. So obviously, this new Cold War paradigm is a way to reduce Chinese economy speed and strength, and give more time to the US to reverse the tables. That's the way I see it. So yes, it's Cold War and strategic rivalry, which is a major trend that we're going to see in the decade, or maybe decades to come.
Sir, what is the likeliness of nuclear warfare or nuclear war in the next future, and how do you analyze this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would say here that let's say the likeliness of having a nuclear war in the future is directly derived from the number of states having the nuclear weapon. It's a matter, let's say, of also nuclear proliferation probability there. So if you have, just to give an example, if you have two states having the nuclear weapons, and you have like 50 states of having nuclear weapons, you see that mathematically, in the second situation, you will have much more likeliness to have this war. So what I think there is that the Non-Proliferation Organization is doing quite a good job to limit or to prevent nuclear proliferation. We see the work that they've been doing in Iran. We know that Iran might have or has the ambition to become a nuclear power, but these have been thwarted, or it is being thwarted by the multinational organization there. So, and if there are not so many states having a nuclear bomb so far. Of course, it depends on the official number or the extra official number, but then again, it's not more than 10. So I think we won't see, like say, this Armageddon scenario of a major nuclear war in the coming future, which is good because once again, nobody wins in a nuclear war. Everybody loses. There's no, you cannot learn anything from this. You just it's just like millions of dead people instantaneously. So that's the first thing. But this being said, it is true that nuclear states have also developed what they call mini nukes, which actually are non-strategic nuclear bombs, like the first ones which were designed, but which are tactical bombs. So what are these tactical bombs about? These tactical bombs are designed to maybe literally annihilate an entire division which is invading your country. Also maybe to bomb the military supply routes. So as you see, it's definitely tactical. It's in the battlefield, so to speak. So this I see as possible. This I see as possible. If a state is scared enough being invaded and wants to give a last warning in a way. But I wouldn't say it's likely, but at least it's possible. And the third thing is what the experts call a dirty bomb. And what is a dirty bomb? A dirty bomb is basically you take radioactive material, like covered with uranium, plutonium, for example, and then you use a normal conventional bomb. So what does this bomb? It disseminates the radioactive material all over the place. So it's sort of a Chernobyl vision where you just you have a lot of people developing cancer or dying early, or you cannot use the crops or the animals. You have to slaughter them. So this is likely, I think, in the world that we will see that, and it's the weapon of choice of terrorist organization, because it's maybe too complex still to master, let's say, the nuclear bombs themselves. But a dirty bomb, it's pretty much within their reach, and this could be really a problem, a big problem.
Sir, how future motives of war will differ from past ones, as in the context of conventional and traditional warfare?
Yes, I think there will be in some areas different motives of war. I'm thinking, for example, about the consequence of global warming. So, if, for example, from a French perspective, let's say the climate of Marseille will be like the climate of Algiers. So what will be the climate of Algiers, for example? So obviously there will be a lot of places which will become too hot and too inhospitable for life. So these people may and will look for other places to go, but in so doing, they will probably bump into other countries which probably have a different view on it. For example, war for fresh water or war for simply for food will happen. So it's funny I don't mean to be disrespectful. It's strange that we call them future motives of war, which they are, but they are also very ancient motives of war. In pre-civilizational, let's say, era, people like nomads would also fight for fresh water. They will also fight for food. So it's a very ancient motive of war that will come back. in a way. And it's really very sad to think about it. And so that's why we have to try to stabilize the countries which face the hard consequences of global warming, helping them planting trees to regulate the climate, helping them maybe manage water differently, or help them build fresh water factories, which actually is very expensive. It's a very easy physical process, but it's very expensive to do that. So if we don't stabilize these fragile countries, I mean ecologically fragile countries, we will have dramatic consequences in the years to come. So that's the one thing. Another thing is we probably will carry on to see religious kind of wars. So when you think about religious in the West, you think about Samuel Huntington and the War of Religions. So they are partly such thing. You can interpret invasion of Iraq as a kind of a crusade, and you can interpret murders in France or in Europe by Muslim people as this kind of wars. But it's not the only thing we will see. You'll see wars intra-religion. So you'll see how maybe in the Islam Shiites and Sunnis like Saudi Arabia and Iran fight against each other, like what's happening in Yemen, for instance. So this will probably won't stop and will intensify. Sorry. What is going to be new as well is what happens in space. I mean, space is the new place for war. If you have read about that, the US has created a space force. France has created a space force. Other nations have created a space force. So why would you do war in space? So you want to do war in space, first of all, because there's a lot of satellites around Earth, which give very precious information. So like GPS, for example, but also information satellites. So the first thing which is appearing is the killer satellites, whose goal is actually to destroy satellites, so either to blind the enemy, well, basically to blind the enemy, but to blind the enemy militarily, for example, but also in terms of communications, in terms of the internet, even. So this will happen, and because you already have some killer satellites, you will have soon satellites which kills killer satellites. So you have some kind of a new, let's say, like if you remember in the First World War, there was in the beginning almost no aviation, and then aviation was for reconnaissance, and then to stop reconnaissance you have a fighter, and then to win against these fighters you created other fighters. So the same thing will happen in space, but not only. You probably have heard about Chinese and Russian intention to go back to the moon, sorry, and to have their permanent stations. So obviously in the moon you have also resources. You have like rare earth, and there's an economic gain to be there, and it won't go unchecked. I mean, we can be sure that the US, maybe also Europe, will try to counter that. I like what Sun Tzu, the Chinese strategist before Christ, said: if you know your enemy and if you know yourself, you won't lose a single battle out of 100. So the idea is, if you want to counter hybrid strategy, first of all, you have to understand very well what hybrid strategy is. And that's the first thing. And then you'll have to understand if you want to we discussed a bit earlier, if you want to be very active there, attacking or defending, you have to defend anyway, or you want to deter by your strength as well. It could be a goal. But basically, all major states will be doing or are doing hybrid warfare. I mean, you don't have to have any division on the field. I mean, just think about all the cyber attacks. Think about all of the corruption of civil servants in one country by spies. Think about manipulation of the finance world. I mean, hybrid warfare is here to stay. This being said, there's an important difference to be made. If you are a democracy, you have to understand that your society is more penetrable than a illiberal society. So for a liberal country, it will be easier to penetrate democracies. This being said, democracies then will need not only a state response, but a state plus private sector plus civil society to counter not only the threats, but also the actions of hybrid warfare. On the other hand, if you are illiberal regime, it's easier to coordinate the answer. The state will take all the responsibility. So, but you have also to take into consideration that liberal regimes may look stronger than democracies, but also they're more rigid. So it's much easier to reform a democracy than to reform a liberal regime. So a liberal regime being threatened and being attacked by hybrid warfare might just fall down. You know? And that's something you have to take into account. The political asymmetry in hybrid warfare.
So thank you so much for your valuable, precious analysis and time for the Debate IA program. Thank you so much again.
My pleasure, Tariq. Have a nice day.